Hello, this is Helen Thomas and the CDFM Study Group. I am going to be doing a PowerPoint presentation of CDFM Module 2, Competency 1, the federal budget process. And I wanted to update this slide because there are differences in the 2018 study guide versus the new study guide, which is the 2020 study guide. So I wanted to make sure we capture those changes. So as I click on the slide, the items will come in one at a time, and it is done in order to show you the process, to help you to understand the process better. All right, so operational chain of command. Remember, it runs from the president to the SecDef to the combatant commanders. So as you're going through your studies, you want to keep that in the back of your mind, because when it comes to allocation of resources, the resources are triggered to meet the needs of the combatant commanders. Remember, DOD, the Department of Defense mission is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And in order to do that, they use combatant commanders in the geographic regions to accomplish that mission. So if those combatant commanders have a requirement, a shortage, a need, then they try to meet that need. So operational chain of command runs from the president to the SecDef to those combatant commanders that you're going to study in your study guides. So everything begins with the National Security Council and the NSC members. First of all, the National Security Council is made up of the President, the Vice President, the SecDef, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Treasury, and they have two advisors, Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff and the Director of Intelligence. Well, what do they do? So they are the highest governmental forum that looks at the conditions the country is in. They look at what type of economic status, our debt, our economy, or income, our threat from outside entities or internal entities, and even the threat of our allies, other countries that we support because they support us. So we also look at what threat is out there. And so what the National Security Council does is, based on their assessment of the various status threat that the country faces, they will publish the National Security Strategy document, the NSS. So you can look at this as the big op order. If you ever hear my study sessions, I always talk about the big op order, because for most people that are associated with the military, they know what an operational order is. That is a big document that has the mission, the vision, the condition, and what they face, what each individual entity is responsible for doing. So the NSS document is the big op order. So you have agencies such as the Department of Defense, Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, all those folks, they take the big op order, which is the NSS document, National Security Strategy, and they look in it to see, okay, well, let me flip. If I'm DOD, I'm flipping to the defense section. Let's see, what is this op order telling me, the DOD, what needs to be done? So the DOD looks at it, namely the Secretary of Defense. So based on what the requirements are in the National Security Strategy, the SecDef will then publish the National Defense Strategy. So that's a 4-year document. That means it's renewed every 4 years, and it ties into the presidential election and so forth, the timeline. But anyway, this National Defense Strategy is the DOD's version of what needs to be done to meet the National Security Strategy. So how does DOD do this? Well, DOD uses 3 decision support systems, namely JCIDS, Pppe, and the Defense Acquisition System. And so They use the three systems and understand that these three systems overlap. Just like if you understand PPBE, it's not after one process, then the other process, then the third process. No, at any given time, these three systems are working and overlapping with each other. But I put it in this order because it helps you to better understand how the three decision support system work to meet the National Defense Strategy and how the National Defense Strategy works to meet the National Security Strategy. Okay, so moving along. So the first DoD support system is JCIS, Joint Capabilities Integration and Development System. So let's say the DoD comes up with their strategy, and part of that is the first thing they have to do is, now we know what we need to do, we need to determine, can we do it? So that is what JCIS does. It identifies capabilities that we have to meet this national defense strategy. What do we already have in our inventory? The people, the equipment, the resources that we already have. And part of this analytical process is to identify capability gaps. What are we missing? Is it something we need to buy? Is it something we need to develop, acquire in the acquisition system? So what they do, as I listed here, is a systematic method used by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to assess gaps in military warfighting capabilities by looking at the .MLPF. So, as you can see, and when you read through your studies, you'll see that the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff is the one in charge of JCIS. And the various Joint Staff members, Army, Navy, Air Force, all those staff members, Marines, are represented on the JROC, Joint Requirements Oversight Council. So they represent the warfighter. So looking at the strategy, looking at what needs to be done, each service agency have their staff member that looks at this order. They identify capability gaps. And how they do that in this analysis is they're looking at doctrine. Is it something we need to change in the way how we do business in that organization, in that unit? Is that training? Is it material? Maybe we need different types of leadership skills, training, personnel, facilities. So the capability gap result out of these .MLPF will determine whether you go directly to PPE or if it triggers the acquisition system. And as you will study, you will see that when they review the .MLPF, if it's a material solution, this is what triggers the defense acquisition system. If it's any one of these, we just need resources, we need more people, we need more equipment, we need more training, all of this triggers the PPBE process alone. If it's a material, we need new weapon systems, we need new computer systems. Those are considered material, EL, and this is what triggers the acquisition system. So you see, JCIS is the essential part of it. So once the JROC, working with the vice chairman, who is the executor and the chairman of the JROC, once they do their analysis and they determine the capability gap, again, because it's represented by joint staff, and the joint staff members would provide an initial capabilities document, ICD, and you'll learn more of this in Module 4. That initial document is saying what type of equipment, what type of vehicle do we need, what does it need to do? So it's not just coming up and identifying a capability gap, they also have to tell you and present the resolution for that capability gap. How do we fix it? The next DoD support system is PPE, planning, programming, budgeting, and execution. So what this does is determine the how and when to pay for a resource to fill this capability gap that we identified in the JSIS. So remember, operational chain of command, president, SecDef, combatant commanders. So your president, civilian, your SecDef is a civilian, and your combatant commanders are your uniformed military personnel. But remember, in the National Security Council, I also said we have advisors. The chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff plays a significant role when it comes to the PPE process because this chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff is your top military advisor. Anything military from those combatant commanders must go through the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff for him to review it, assess it, provide recommendation to the sector. So how does the combatant commanders let their higher know what their capability issues are? The combatant commanders will issue IPLs, integrated priority lists. So anytime you hear IPL, this name is only associated with combatant commanders. And based on the 2020 study guide, there's 11 can't talk today, 11 combatant commands. So I think the Space Command is the newest because it used to be 10 in your older study guide. 2020 study guide, it's 11. So the combatant commanders issue IPLs. It tells you here, they send a copy to the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. They send a copy to the SecDef, and they also send a copy to the military departments. If it's an Army asset, they send a copy, a heads up to the Army, hey, this is what we're requesting. If it's an Air Force asset, so which military department is going to be tagged to provide this equipment. Remember, your commanders, regional commanders, they don't own anything. They get resource based on the area they're in. So these departments, they own the items. So that's why they provide a copy to each one of those entities. As mentioned, because you're chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, who also, remember, have joint staff. He's got an Army representative, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, Marines. All of those representatives report to the chairman. So the chairman does his assessment from recommendation from those supporting staff, and then the chairman will provide his recommendation of the IPLs and the military status related to strategy up to the SecDef. So then the SecDef takes this national military strategy. Based on what this national defense strategy is, the SecDef will then say, okay, these are the things the military needs to do. Based on their requirement, what they say they need, based on, so remember, that's why he's there is tying the strategy all together based on what they're asking. What they're asking must be tied to the national defense strategy. And then it allows the SecDef to then provide policy guidance, defense strategic guidance, national military strategy, homeland defense. So these are all the things that I listed here into this national defense strategy. So it provides a joint planning document. So it shows you how all your military assets can work together to provide the military support necessary in the DoD's national defense strategy. So the final document is the joint planning document. This gives guidance into how we move into the planning phase of Pppe. So here you see the planning phase of Pppe is used to develop the plan to meet this guy right here, the National Defense Strategy. So the planning phase is the USD, Under Secretary of Defense for Policy, is responsible for the planning phase. So you need to know these things. Like up here, I said your chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff provides SecDef an assessment of gaps and recommendation. He's the one that reports to the SecDef. Your vice chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, executor of JSIDS, he's responsible for this system, and he's a chairman of the JROC. That's the council that actually does the JSIDS process. And he also sits on the acquisition system. So they kind of all overlap in these three support systems to meet the national defense strategy. So the final document in the planning phase of Pppe, I'm back down here, is the Defense Planning Guidance. But before you move on, before you enter the next phase, the DCAPE, Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation, and the USD Comptroller provides guidance on how you're going to execute the POM phase and the budget estimate submission. So they send that guidance out to the agencies. Defense Planning Guidance. The programming phase of Pppe, what it does, it translates this plan to allocation of resources. As you know, you're not going to be able to do everything, so we need key category of things that we're going to have to do. So you allocate resources. The DCAPE, Director of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation, is responsible for the programming phase of Pppe at the DoD level. So everything is, remember, this is a certified defense financial management exam. So I'm talking about who at the DoD level is responsible for that phase. So he's kind of from bottom up is the combatant commanders. They do not submit their own POM, Program Office Estimate, or their POM, Program Office Estimate. They submit their POM to the components. Again, Army, the military department, their components. They submit their POM numbers, their POM requests. Goes again, same up to the channel, chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, provides an assessment and recommendation on the POM, and it sends it up to the SecDef. Then these are different groups at, excuse me, at the DoD level. So no different than, let's say you submit an award for someone. You know that that award you submit does not go directly to the commander. It goes through probably your personnel folks review it, then it goes to your first sergeant, your sergeant major. So it goes through different channels before it has to get to the SecDef. So sometimes at these levels, they have signature authority. So you have the 3-star review group, they're reviewing the POM. You have the Deputies Management Action Group. They used to be called, now referred to as 4-star group. And then you have the Secretary of Defense group. So there are different levels of groups that reviews the POM. The DCAPE updates the Future Year Defense Program. You're going to know about this in your Module 2, FYDP. That is the DoD database that keeps track of these programming numbers, the budget from here on out. It keeps track of all of these categories, what was approved. So FYDP is 10 to 11 years of data that they keep track of in this database. The DCAPE, same guy that's in charge of programming, is in charge of updating the Future Year Defense Program. And when it's all said and done, at the end, the final document that is published at the end of the programming phase of Pppe is your Program Decision Memorandum. Even though on my diagram it shows programming then budgeted, understand that because different entities handle programming and another entity handles budgeting, these are actually happening simultaneously. They're happening at the same time. All right, so at the budgeting phase, translate these programs into appropriations. Because again, if we need resources and money from Congress, we got to be able to translate the programs from here into a viable appropriation. The USD Comptroller, Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller, is in charge of the budgeting phase of Pppe. So likewise, the combatant commanders submit their budget estimate submission to the component so that they can include it in their budget. The chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, the chairman does his assessment and recommendation, provides it to the SecDef, and you have those groups again at the DoD level that reviews the document. An additional system, you see here, we talked about DCAPE is being updated, program associated with the cost. But in the budgeting phase, you have the Comptroller Information System is also updated with the final budget numbers that's submitted to Congress. The final document in the budgeting phase is the Program Budget Decision. Program Decision Memorandum, Program Budget Decision. So that is the final document that is submitted in the budgeting phase as you update the CIS and the future year defense program. So then in the budgeting phase, the budget has to be submitted to OMB. Your program, your POM information gets submitted to higher because all of this will have to eventually go to Congress. So the FYDP updates are done. The program decision memorandums, that's the DoD's final program, and the program budget decision is the DoD's final budget, is submitted to OMB. So what you need to know with OMB is, remember, the president has until no later than the first Monday in February to submit this budget for the new coming fiscal year to Congress. And when Congress gets it, Congress goes through the budget resolution process. That's when they try to determine what criteria they're going to use as they review the president's budget, the PresBud. Another phase in the congressional process is the authorization process. So these authorizers are looking at the POM data because the only purpose of the authorization process is to authorize the programs. It doesn't matter if money is listed in the authorization law. You do not get budget authority from the authorization law. And finally, as far as the budgeting that is reviewed at Congress, the appropriation law is the end result from Congress. Congress appropriate funds, then the Treasury. So what happens after Congress appropriates? Two things happen. The Treasury issues the Treasury warrant. That is the first legal process because that is tied to Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, saying that no money can be drawn out of the Treasury unless you have an appropriation law in place. So the Treasury issues the Treasury warrant and OMB begins the apportionment process. That is when the agencies submit an SF-132 within 10 days, and OMB will issue them their funds within 30 days. So part of the execution phase of Pppe, which is a responsibility of the USD Comptroller, is to monitor the execution of this plan when it comes to money. So you know you have annual funding, incremental, full funding. You got your different terms. Your appropriations are current, then they're expired for a certain amount of time, then they're closed. So those are terms that you need to know. Then the third system that is used by the DoD is the Defense Acquisition System. So if you remember, when we talked about JCIDs, as they review the .MLPF, if the capability gap is filled by a material solution, then it triggers the Defense Acquisition System. This is how we buy or develop what is needed. So material solution triggers the Defense Acquisition System. Just like the Vice Chairman has the JROC, down here you have the Defense Acquisition Board. So the DoD Senior Forum for Advising on Major Defense Acquisition System. Anything ACAT 1 says it's a major system. ACAT 1 Delta, the D behind it tells you it's a DoD level major system. And it compares it with near-term needs. So under Secretary of Defense Acquisition and Sustainment, this changed from the older study guides. And I think on the next click, I'll have the different changes that I annotated. So the chairman of this Defense Acquisition Board is the USD ANS. And remember, the vice chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff from up here, he is a co-chairman of the Defense Acquisition Board. He sits on this board also, because this is how they tie long-range requirements to near-term needs. So we got to be able to still do our jobs today, but we still need a plan for long-term. So he overlaps. So he sits, the vice chairman sits on JSITS, and he sits on the Defense Acquisition System. Then you have the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff that is involved in the PPBE process. So as you can see, these are some of the changes that I was able to recognize that changed from the 2018 and earlier study guides. The National Defense Strategy here used to be called the Quadrennial Defense Review. It's the 4-year DoD strategy. According to Congress, every agency must have a strategic plan. So the NDS, National Defense Strategy, is the DoD strategic plan. PDM replaced Resource Management Decision. So the older study guide says the final document in programming and the final document in budgeting was RDMD. Now you have Program Decision Memorandum for programming and Program Budget Decision for budgeting. This is what I just stated. USD ANS replaced USD ATNL. And the Chief Information Officer used to be CIO, Chief Signal Officer. Now it's called USD Research and Engineering. This is the Chief Technology Person at the DoD level. So although I didn't list him up here, understanding that I couldn't include everything in this slide, but if any of the POM or the budget information includes technology development in the acquisition system, if they're developing anything technology, any computer system, think of GFIBS, that's a computer system. If it's a DoD system like DTS, Defense Travel System, understand that the USD Research and Engineering is a Chief Technology Officer at the DoD level, or he's a Chief Information Officer. Okay, so this was just a snapshot to kind of tie in this federal budget process for you to understand how that relates down to the DoD level and the National Defense Strategy using 3 decision support systems: JSITS, Identify Capability Gaps; PPBE looks on how you pay for these or resource the capability gap, or if we need to buy or develop, we use the Defense Acquisition System. So this concludes our review of the federal budget process. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM Study Group. Be sure to subscribe or like these videos. If you identified or see something that's wrong in the videos, feel free to leave a comment. I'm not offended. It just means that I need to update the information. So more eyes on is better. Thank you so much for stopping by. Again, this is Helen Thomas and the CDFM Study Group.